What would you do if you weren't afraid? Perhaps you've never really asked yourself this question. But think about it for a moment. How many decisions in your life have been shaped by fear? How many doors have you failed to open? How many words have you swallowed? How many versions of yourself have you locked away in silence, simply because something inside you whispered, "What if it goes wrong?" Fear is silent. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It doesn't attack us directly, it hides. It's in procrastination disguised as perfectionism. It's in the anger you don't understand. It's in the excuses you've been repeating for years. Carl Jung used to say that everything we don't face within ourselves we end up finding as our destiny. And fear, perhaps more than any other emotion, is living proof of this. But what if fear isn't just a weakness? What if fear is a language? A language spoken by the unconscious. Have you ever noticed how sometimes we feel afraid for no apparent reason? An anxiety that comes out of nowhere, a restlessness without a name. The unconscious is speaking. It's trying to warn us, protect us, or make us see something we don't want to see. We live conditioned by it, by fear, without realizing it. We make decisions based on it, avoid conversations, sabotage our goals, enter or leave relationships, and we call it life. But are we really choosing? Or are we just reacting? In this video, we'll take a deep dive into the nature of fear through the lens of Carl Jung's depth psychology. We'll understand how fear connects with the shadow, how it manifests itself through repression and projection, and how, instead of destroying us, it can reveal who we really are. Because maybe, fear isn't there to stop us, but to show us the path that matters most. Have you ever tried to fight fear? Close your eyes, take a deep breath, repeat to yourself that everything is fine, but still, something remains. Something invisible, latent, like smoke seeping through the cracks in your mind. This is because fear, in Jung's view, is not just a feeling, it's an energy. A living psychic force, working in the depths of the unconscious. Fear doesn't disappear just because we ignore it. In fact, the more we avoid it, the more it accumulates underground in the soul. Jung called this repressed energy, and this energy doesn't stand still. It transforms. It seeks expression. If it is not listened to, it can turn into symptoms, chronic anxiety, panic attacks, phobias, destructive impulses, or even physical illnesses. When we don't understand fear as an energy, we end up treating it as an enemy. We try to suppress it, silence it, overcome it. But Jung invites us to take another path, that of observing fear as a message from the unconscious. Fear, from this perspective, is an inverted compass. It points exactly where we don't want to look, and that's where the psychic gold is. What we fear usually holds something essential about who we are. Maybe you're afraid of failure, because unconsciously you're still looking for someone's approval. Maybe you're afraid of loneliness, because you haven't yet met your own companion. Maybe your fear is of judgment, and it's revealing an inner critic much harsher than any external voice. Fear shapes behaviors, choices, entire identities, all outside of our consciousness. It infiltrates our decisions like a hidden programmer. We act thinking we are in control, but we are puppets of energies that have never been brought to light. But here's the point, when we look fear in the face, without judgment, it stops being just a shadow, and starts being light. That energy that used to paralyze us can now move us. Jung said that, the shadow is everything that a person does not recognize in themselves. And herein lies one of the deepest connections with fear. The shadow isn't just what we hide from others, it's mainly what we hide from ourselves. Traits we reject. Thoughts we deem unacceptable. Impulses we deny feeling. Memories that we push down into the cellars of our psyche. And fear is often the guardian of these cellars. Have you ever felt afraid without knowing exactly what it was? As if a part of you is afraid of something that even your rational mind doesn't understand. This is because fear is often linked to what has been cast into the shadows. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of failing. Fear of not being loved. Fear of being who you really are. These fears don't come out of nowhere. They are fed by parts of us that were rejected, perhaps in childhood, adolescence, or even yesterday. When we try to repress these parts, they don't disappear, they turn into fear. And that fear, in turn, becomes a barrier between you and your truth. The shadow, then, is not just a psychological concept. It is a dark mirror. And fear is the sensation we feel when we approach this mirror. That's why we often run away from introspection. We run away from silence. We run away from ourselves. Because we know that if we look closely, we'll see what we're trying to forget. But here is the Jungian paradox: everything we repress controls us. And everything we bring to consciousness sets us free. When you begin to confront your shadow, to recognize the traits you've rejected, fear begins to dissolve. Because fear only grows in darkness. And consciousness is light. The shadow is not your enemy. It's a lost part of you. And fear is the sign that it is near. Perhaps, then, the right question is not, how do I overcome fear? But rather, what in me still lives in the shadows? Have you ever noticed how we often blame the world for our fears? We say that it's work that exhausts us, that it's people who threaten us, that it's the future that worries us. But what if all this is just the stage on which we project what we don't want to see inside ourselves? Jung called this projection, an unconscious mechanism where we move outwards what we can't accept internally. And fear is one of the most projected feelings there is. The fear we have of people, for example, can be a projection of our insecurity. Fear of external judgment is often a reflection of our own inner critic. The fear of failure may be covering up a deep sense of inadequacy, an old wound that has never been looked at. The truth is that the world becomes a mirror of our psyche. And when we don't recognize our fears, they take external forms, situations, faces, threats. We create enemies. We create dangers. We create monsters. But these monsters have our traits. It's uncomfortable to accept this. After all, it's easier to blame the world than to look inwards. It's easier to run away from external danger than to face the abyss within. But this is the invitation of Jungian self-knowledge, to understand that what terrifies us most out there, may be born in here. And it's not about denying the real world or its difficulties. It's about understanding how we interpret this world based on what we carry in our souls. When we project our fears, we no longer have control over them. We start to live reactively, in constant defense, trying to control what's outside, without realizing that the source is inside. Projection is a form of escape. But every escape requires energy. And this energy, over time, turns into psychological fatigue, existential anxiety, and a feeling of emptiness. That's why Jung said, everything that irritates us in others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And the same goes for what scares us. Perhaps, then, it's time to collect these projections. To stop looking at the world as a threat, and start asking, what does this fear say about me? Carl Jung believed that the true purpose of life is not happiness, but individuation, the process of becoming who you really are. But this path is anything but comfortable. Because growth requires confrontation. It requires crossing your own boundaries. It requires diving into the unknown of the soul. And this is where fear appears as a guardian. He stands between you and your transformation. He says, don't go down that road. It's dangerous. You could fail. You could get lost. And that's why many people give up on growing. They prefer to stay in the zone of the known. In the bubble of security. In the roles they learn to play from an early age. But this fear is actually a protective illusion. It tries to preserve who you are, even if that you is far from authentic. Have you ever felt a deep desire to change, but something inside you paralyzed you? Have you ever wanted to follow an intuition, a calling, but fear of judgment made you back down? This is fear acting as a block to individuation. Because becoming who you are, means giving up who you were. And this symbolic death is frightening. The ego fears losing control. It fears dissolving. But it is in this process of disintegration that the true self is born. That's why Jung said that the path to individuation is like going through the dark forest. Fear will always be present, but it's precisely fear that indicates that you're on the right path. If you feel fear, it's because you're approaching a real transformation. The difference between those who grow and those who remain stagnant is not the absence of fear, but the courage to face it. To use it as a compass. To see fear not as an enemy, but as a messenger. So the next time fear arises, don't run away. Listen to it. It may be showing you exactly where your soul needs to go. Because individuation only happens when we have the courage to go through what we fear the most. Fear doesn't disappear when it's ignored. It transforms itself. Into symptoms. Into repetitive patterns. In silent sabotage. That's why Jung proposed something radical, facing fear, welcoming it, integrating it. Not as a weakness, but as a legitimate part of the soul. But what does this mean in practice? First, it means recognizing it. Giving it a name. Noticing the moments when fear guides our choices, in relationships, in abandoned dreams, in the words we stop saying. Then it means observing. Without judgment. Understanding where it comes from. What history feeds it? What trauma sustains it? And finally, it means dialoguing with it. Not expelling it, but inviting it to consciousness. What do you want to tell me? Is the question that begins the process of integration. Jung called this making the unconscious, conscious. And that takes courage. Because the unconscious is vast. Dark. Unpredictable. But it holds all the keys to our liberation. When we look fear in the face, it changes shape. It stops being a monster and becomes a message. It stops being a prison and becomes a portal. It stops being a shadow and becomes a force. Integration happens little by little. In small acts of truth. In facing standards. Listening to the body. In paying attention to dreams. Because the unconscious speaks, but it speaks with symbols, images, and sensations. You have to silence the external noise to hear this subtle language. And here comes the importance of personal rituals, writing, meditating, walking alone, revisiting memories. These practices create bridges between the conscious mind and the hidden depths of the soul. Jung said, there is no awakening of consciousness without pain. But it is precisely this pain that indicates that something is being born. Something real. Something whole. The integration of fear is not an end point. It's a path. A process. A journey that never ends, but which, with each step, brings us closer to who we really are. And maybe, just maybe, fear has always been there for that. To push us towards our essence. Maybe fear was never the villain we thought it was. Maybe it's the guardian of the door that leads to transformation. It's not fear that destroys, it's our refusal to listen to it. It screams when we ignore it. It becomes anxiety, anger, paralysis. But when we look into its eyes, it whispers truths that we have avoided for years. Every fear carries a lesson. An aspect of us that has been exiled, silenced, forgotten. And if you've come this far, it's because something inside you wants to remember. It wants to recover. It wants to integrate. The journey inwards is arduous. But it's the only worthwhile one. Jung didn't give us ready-made answers. He gave us maps. And the courage to explore the most forgotten regions of the soul. And now, I ask you. What fear is asking to be heard in your life? Leave it in the comments. Your shadow may be similar to that of others, and by sharing it, you help bring light. If this video touched you, if it awakened something inside you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's so much more to explore together. This is just the beginning of the journey. In the next videos, we'll continue to unravel the paths of the unconscious, the shadow, trauma, and the freedom that only comes when we face the darkness. Are you ready to keep going down? See you on the next dive.